Last year I was here, thanks to the organizers for inviting me even again. Last year, sorry, I told you more about my BCI research. Today I thought talking more about virtual reality because I see there's a lot of interest, and my talk turned out to be a little bit theoretic and conceptual, very little data, but I hope it will be interesting and new and relevant for most of you. In my lab, which is in the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya, that's north of Tel Aviv, it's the first and only private university in Israel. My lab studies two types of technologies which are, extreme examples of human-machine confluence. So virtual reality about 50 years ago was invented by Ivan Sutherland. He called it the ultimate display or the ultimate experience. And BCI is maybe the ultimate interface. So we look at both of them together and separately. And so, first of all, I think I realized that most of you are already aware that finally, after so many years, the industry has picked up and it's become much easier to do virtual reality. How many people here have actually tried the Oculus Rift or Vive or Samsung Gear VR? Or, okay. So it's getting easier, and I think you should all try it. But the industry, especially Silicon Valley, but everywhere, is already working on the next generation of devices, which will be even much more impressive in augmented reality. So all this is very dramatic and has a lot of opportunities for everything and for us. But what is VR good for? And there are misunderstandings. Still, a lot of people think it's about video games. Of course, here there are some different examples, but I want to elaborate and define some things in that scope. So the first simple answer is that VR is a very, very powerful tool for manipulating subjective experience. But I want to stress that it is not only about the sensory replacement. It's not a visual medium. The most interesting aspect, I think, about VR is the sensory motor contingencies, okay? So think about it, you are medical doctors, I guess, most of you are students, so you know that we live in an action perception loop. So think about the image on your eyes, on your retina, right? It keeps changing all the time. You move your head, and even if you don't move your head, you move your eyes, but the brain knows how to correct so that we perceive the world to be stable. Now, in VR, something similar happens. You move your head, and the world around you changes according to your own head movement. So the brain kind of says, this is real, something interesting going on. So this is, I think, the more interesting trick of virtual reality, which is, of course, related to what we are talking about. Well, the answer number two, which I won't talk about it a lot, but I think it's important to understand that VR will come with a set of other technologies. In the industry, the buzzwords are something like XR, virtual and augmented reality. I look at it as three related technologies. In virtual reality, you put on the goggles, and you are in an imaginary world. In augmented reality, you put on the goggles, you are still here in the physical world, but you see imaginary content on top of it. And in telepresence, which is also very important, you put on the goggle, and you are in a real place, but a different place, in a remote place. And all these things will come together, 3, 5, 10 years, will be much more available, and will present a lot of new opportunities. And of course, one of the main highlights of virtual reality is, of course, the possibility to transfer to reality. You can easily, in a safe, relatively easy way to develop all kinds of scenarios, arbitrarily complex scenarios, and still let people practice and learn new skills. But it is very important, and this is something that, of course, we know and has been tested for many years. It's important to do the VR correctly, otherwise you do not get this transfer and you might even be mistraining. Okay, think about critical applications like the combat soldier or a medical, maybe a surgeon. If you think about the soldier, for example, if you want to train them for combat and you do it with a video game with a flat screen, so they think they know how to act in combat, but then they arrive to the real scene and it's bigger and it's stereoscopic. It's sorry, there's depth, there's noise, there's smell and everything. So this is why these industries have spent so much time trying to get the little details correctly to avoid mistraining. Now, the next answer is why it's such an interesting tool for research of human behavior. And our focus in our VR research is not so much on transfer to reality, but on behavioral realism. Okay? So this movie that you see here is the movie that was projected, one of the first ever public screenings of a movie in, think about Paris, the end of the 19th century, people gathering in the basement of the Café Lumière, and people saw this movie and ran out of the basement, ran out from the screen. Okay? We don't know what really happened, but I asked the historians of art, and they confirm that the day after in the news, it said that people actually ran out from the movie. Okay, so this is what we mean by behavioral realism. Okay? It's not that you are engaged by the media. You behave as if it was a real stimuli. Now, I haven't seen anyone running. I showed you this scary train coming at you. I haven't seen anyone run away. So today with movies, we cannot achieve this behavioral realism, but it turns out that with virtual reality, to some degree, we can. And these are the interesting points in our research. So the fourth answer is it might be a game changer. Some would go as far as saying, just like you have the microscope changing biology and the telescope changing astronomy, virtual reality presents new opportunities to study human behavior with the best of both internal and external validity. You can have controlled laboratory experiments, but have ecological conditions almost like in the real world. Okay? So, one of the more interesting things, and I was fortunate to work first as a postdoc and then as a collaborator with Mel Slater on 15 years almost of virtual reality research in European projects and learned a lot of things. And one of the most interesting things is that it seems that we have two levels of response in virtual reality. So take a look at the left example is the famous pit room. You walk into a virtual apartment and suddenly you see that there's a hole on the floor. You see the ground, the floor beneath you, and many people experience some sense of fear of height. But some people say, well, yeah, I wasn't scared. Okay, it wasn't really scary. But when you look at their body language, you measure the physiological responses, you see that the closer they get to the precipice, the more scared they are. Similarly with the social situations. And again, I'm talking about very bad graphics, animation done more than 10 years ago. So you have this social scenario with a virtual human, and people say, you know what, these animations are cartoony, they're not realistic, so the photorealism is very low, but whenever this virtual human looks you in the eye, we can see some very distinct neurophysiological response, okay, event-related heart rate changes or whatever. So are all these people lying to us? Are they saying that the VR is not so effective, but they don't want to admit that they are excited? So I think what's going on here is something like this. This is the theory or the diagram from Ledoux, which is one of the main leading researchers of the neural correlates of emotions. Okay? So Ledoux talks about the fact that when you see, let's say he studies fear, so let's say you see a scary snake, and then immediately there's a short circuit going directly to your amygdala, which is activated, and then a bit later, maybe a few hundred milliseconds later, your cortical processes and says, yes, it's a snake, you have to, by that time you've already run away, probably. But I think what's going on in VR, and this is of course very difficult to prove experimentally, is that your amygdala gets the information that it's a snake and starts being excited, and then maybe 100, 200 milliseconds, the cortex says, no, don't worry, it's not a real snake, it's just virtual reality. But it's too late because you are already excited, okay? And it's like, some parts of your limbic system do not know what VR is. Your cortex, it's oversimplification, but I think this is a way to help us think about it. Your cortex knows that it's pixels in your glasses, but your limbic system doesn't, okay? And this is why we get very, very powerful responses, even from people knowing that it's not real stimuli. Now, the most interesting development in virtual reality which I think is very related. Again, if we have time, we will get to BCI and how it's related, but I hope you can make the picture, complete the picture, even if we don't get to all the details, is about what we call re-embodiment, okay? So first I will give you the personal experience. So this is the first time I was embodied. So we had this European Union project with brain-computer interface and virtual reality. And the first time I was put into a body of a woman, okay? So I look down and I see, you know, if you put the Oculus or the Vive, there's something missing. You don't see your own body, right? If you look down now, you move your hand moves. You move your legs move. In virtual reality now, usually it doesn't happen. So what we do is we develop these technologies, we track your body movements, you look down, you see a virtual body, but it can be a body of someone else. So the more powerful thing is not just seeing the image of a body of a woman, it's the sensory motor contingencies, okay? I move my leg and I see this skinny leg with a heel. You know, I look at the mirror, I see a body of a woman, but it's my body because I am moving it. So virtual reality with re-embodiment is a very, very powerful illusion. I will try to walk you briefly through the science behind it. Again, a high-level overview. We see how much time we have. But it obviously starts with how many people have heard about the rubber arm illusion? How many people know this stuff? Okay, this is an illusion that you can even try at home, maybe. So I will explain quickly for those who don't know. So the participant is sitting down. Her real left hand is hidden from her view, and instead she sees a rubber arm. The experimenter standing simultaneously taps both arms, the real arm and the rubber arm. Okay? And after, well, the literature says 23 seconds. After 23 seconds, on average, many people start feeling a strong illusion that the rubber arm is their own. And the reason, and think about your brain, about the multisensory integration. You feel the touch in one place, and you see it in the rubber arm. You feel it in your own hand, but you see it in the rubber arm. In this case, like in many other cases, in humans at least, the visual sense is more dominant. So you think that, or you feel that the rubber arm is your own hand. Okay. So this is a nice party trick, but how do you make it into a paper in Nature? And so this is what Botvinnik and Cohen did. They stabbed the rubber arm, and then you can measure exactly the level of arousal, the physiological response. You can play with a condition, control condition, experimental condition, etc. And you have a scientific paradigm for studying the mechanism of self-body ownership. What we have done in this European project, especially again, months later, I will show what other people were doing. So the first thing is to show that you can reconstruct the same illusion in virtual reality, okay? You don't need a rubber arm, you can use technology, but of course this opens many more possibilities. So Henrik Ersson in Sweden took the same concept and showed that you can have a full body, out-of-body experience, okay? You see yourself, so the video, again, you see a live video feed from the back, you're tapped on the back, and this way you have a sensation, some people at least have a sensation of out-of-body experience. Again, using live stereoscopic video, okay? This is what we call the embodiment station in Italy. So what you can see on the right-hand picture, so I see, okay, so there is an additional stimulation of the muscles, electrical stimulation of the muscles in the right time, in the right frequency. So my hand is stationary, but I see in VR my hand flexing. I feel my hand flexing because of the electrical stimulation. So this was a perfect illusion. I really believe that my hand was flexing, even though I did not move my hand. Okay? So the other direction, by the way, with the muscle freeing itself is not very, the illusion wasn't as good. But the combination of VR, and in this case, fooling your muscles, is very powerful. And on the left is a whole station where you are, in fact, you are sitting down or even lying, but you see a first person of a person walking or running down the street. You feel muscles on your arms and legs activated in the right time through this electrical stimulation, and you can have an illusion of being in a different activity, okay, with obvious implications for paralyzed patients, etc. Okay. Now, the even more interesting story, maybe less related to this audience, but I think also relevant and interesting for you guys, is that now that we see that we can have these illusions, we can put you in the body of someone else. So there's a long series of studies from Mel and then from Jeremy Bailinson at Stanford, and I'll show you what we did. So, for example, if we put you, an adult, in the body of a child, you start behaving in a more childlike way, in very concrete ways that can be measured, things like judging object sizes, etc. If we put you, one of the favorite is on the bottom right, you learn to drum faster if we put you in the body of a cool black guy with Rasta hair than if we put you with the body of a white guy, which is less likely to learn how to drum certain beats. So these have been shown again and again to have very profound effects. I'll give you another example. This is, we are collaborating in my lab with an artist who fortunately decided to do a PhD. Can we have a little bit of sound? So you are in the virtual reality. What we are doing now is using stereoscopic video instead of computer graphics. This is what you see, and we have a confederate that learns to play your hands just like learning to play the music. And then we take young students and put them, for example, in the body of elderly people. And it's not just, again, sensory motor. You have touch, you move your hand. You can look to the side and see yourself in the mirror as an old body, okay? So this is just a teaser, but we basically completed an experiment where we put you in the body, where we take students, we put them in the body of very young people, 6 or 7 years old, and very old people. And, my time is almost running out. But, so we found a very interesting effect. We found, so the person who was working on this project, she also studied conflict. And what she found is that significantly, people who were embodied in an older age body were much more optimistic about the chances of resolving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It's a long story how we got there, but then she looked at the questionnaire results, surveys, taking place in the last 20 years, and indeed, it looks like a real finding there. It looks like there is, this is just surveys, there is a positive correlation in the Israeli population. The older you get, the more optimistic you get about the chances of solving the conflict. And we showed that in VR, we can take young people, make them older, and start believing that there's a solution to the conflict. Okay, I have a couple of minutes. I hope how this relates to BCI and VR should be clear. There were very good talks about this. So what we did, I showed you last year this famous study where we took the tetraplegic patient. This was kind of disembodiment, okay? You bypass, brain-computer interface is bypassing the body, ignoring the body. Okay, you have just a brain controlling a device, okay? But we think it's much better to look at it as re-embodiment, even with BCI. Sorry about the fonts. But for example, in this less known paper, but I think it's actually the first paper where we show at the same time, again, at that time it was difficult, so 3 subjects, but controlling a virtual avatar with a motor BCI. Imagining your hand, the avatar waves. Imagining your feet, the avatar starts walking. I think this is a much better way to think about BCI and VR as re-embodiment rather than disembodiment, which is very popular in BCI. Okay, I will finish with this. Maybe tomorrow, I think we will have time for a few more points related to this. Again, this is an interpretation by Daniel, the artist, motor imagery BCI with a twist. So here, The paralyzed patient is actually, well, he's just a little paralyzed, a high spinal injury, but he's a dancer. He dances with a wheelchair. But in this particular installation, which we didn't turn into an experiment, sometimes we turn these into experiments. This is just an artistic installation. So he's controlling, he's sending his thoughts to these dancers. They get stimulations in the legs or feet, and they have to improvise dance based on his motor imagery thoughts. Right hand, left hand, feet, etc. So this is the kind of stuff. I think I can conclude now. I hope the message was clear that virtual reality is a very interesting research question. It's not just a game that you use even for rehabilitation, for serious games. There's very profound questions about how the brain constructs reality, how to fool the brain. There's a lot of synergy between neuroscience and virtual reality research, and thank you very much.
What about questions? Между прочим, мы сейчас сидели с Михаилом Лебедевым и подумали, we thought about the... Still not. How we will change the body if you know anorexia.
Yes.
Yeah, we will change body from the big one to small one for that person, and he will think, oh, I have nice body. It's possible to do that in the brain-computer interface, just.
But why would you use brain-computer interface? Again, I'm not saying don't use brain-computer interface, but why do you need the BCI? The virtual reality can fool the brain.
We need transform our imagination reality.
To transform the homunculus.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Окей. Нет вопросов, тогда мы следующий. Есть, да? О, да, пожалуйста.
А вы сможете перевести?
У нас переводит кто-то? Вам. Окей, I will translate.
Спасибо большое за ваш доклад. Скажите, пожалуйста, как раз какие практически вы видите перспективы вот этих исследований? Меня особенно интересует именно сфера реабилитации пациентов, которые получили травму позвоночника. У вас это затронуто. На каком этапе сейчас и какие перспективы вы видите? Спасибо.
Yes, I'm not a medical doctor. I cannot say that I have any deep insights for you now. I'm sorry about this. There is much to say about the VR and the rehabilitation, but I'm not familiar with specifically this kind of application. We did not go into the medical domain with this one.